Hello and welcome to another tutorial. This is tutorial 4 in our exploration of Google Sheets. This will be one of the later tutorials for ITECH 100, and this will be the first Sheets tutorial for ITECH 150. Sort of a refresher, get back into spreadsheets and introduce us to Google Sheets. So, the tutorial link will look like this. We will open it in a new tab. So, charts. We're going to build a few functions. We're going to make a couple charts. Charts come in all different shapes and sizes. They're kind of our primary way of visualizing tabular data. You can look at a table all day long and it won't make a whole lot of sense unless you create some sort of picture that we can make sense of. So there's all sorts of different kinds of charts out there. We have line graphs. We're going to make a line graph, a pie chart, and a bar graph. We won't do a scatter plot in this tutorial, but we might in a later one. Line graphs are typically used to display value over time. This is a pretty old value chart for the price of Bitcoin. But you can see how there was a big spike here. You can easily see how the value of this cryptocurrency changed over the course of this period of time. Since 2014 up until, I think I screenshotted this in 2019. There's actually been a lot more fluctuations since then. Pie charts are used for showing the proportional values, parts of a whole. Like a pie is a pie chart comparing the amount of pie that I've eaten to the amount of pie that I have not yet eaten. Here's a couple of examples of clever pie charts that have the center cut out to show the total, and then the slices that show the different values of each of these segments of the U.S. national budget. Bar graphs usually are for comparing groups of things. So this one shows a gradation of different breaking all of American households into groups of 5,000, so anyone under 5,000, and then up to 10,000, then up to 15,000, then up to 20,000. So it's like each one of these is a $5,000 increment. The one thing about this chart that's interesting is that it's slightly misleading. This part over here on the far right shows a big spike, which implies that there's a whole bunch of rich people in the world, but it's not really the case. If this chart was true to the data, it would just go off and get smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller, because you look, these increments are much wider here. And it mentions that, but the real flow of this chart is that it tapers off a lot. Off to whatever the richest person in the world is. I think it's Jeff Bezos right now. Scatter plots are for taking data you take two variables and examine the correlations between them. So here's one that's over time, the amount of ozone depleting substances that were produced in the United States by year. And so you can see laws started to be passed in the 90s banning CFCs, and then production completely tailed off by the late 90s. Here's another kind of scatter plot that shows a distinct trend. We're correlating the length and width of Puget Sound butter clams. N equals 88 means there are 88 clams that they measured. And so as this chart shows, the width of a butter clam is positively correlated very strongly with the length of a butter clam. Here's kind of an interesting one, comparing the days of ice on Lake Superior with the average temperature of that winter, or of whatever winter. So as we can see, there is kind of a line that you can draw through here. You can do sort of a linear regression here that would draw a line kind of downward slanting through this. showing that if the temperatures are lower, like on this end of the graph, the number of days of ice is higher. There are a few outliers here. These ones are kind of really weird outlier values, but for the most part, the rest of them fit in this plane right here. This is kind of interesting. There's a fun link here in the tutorial. I encourage you to click on it, showing spurious correlations, which are correlations that don't have any bearing on reality. Even though they look like correlations, there's not actually a causal relationship between the two. They're kind of fun to look at. So feel free to check out this link at your leisure. Maybe I'll show it off in class when I talk about charts. For anybody that already took ITECH 100, this will be familiar. We're going to redo this entire tutorial in Sheets because I think that, because seeing as how you've already done this tutorial in Excel, this will give us a good idea of the sorts of things that are different in Sheets. And there are a few things that are significantly different in Sheets, but I think we'll find that we can do a lot of the same stuff with only minor modifications. And in fact, some things Sheets does a little bit easier. So the start file is here. I'm going to open it in a new tab. So I right-click on the link, open in a new tab, and then and here it is. Now make sure that you hit File and make a copy. And then we're going to call this Bill's tutorial. And save it. And I'll get rid of the original one so I don't accidentally edit it. And then I'm going to take this tutorial and move it to my other screen so that I can show you guys what we're doing. So I'm going to make things a little bit bigger so you can see it. So the first thing we want to do is make this thing look a little prettier because this is pretty ugly. This data is very, very raw. So one thing that Excel does is you can merge and center with one click. Here it does require a couple of clicks. So the first thing we want to do is take the title of this chart and make it into one cell so that it's centered above, like right here, centered above the center of the graph. So we're going to take cell A1, click on it, drag it over to cell M1, and then here's the merge tool. So we'll just click merge. That will create one single cell, and then we'll use the alignment tool to switch it to center aligned. So that'll make it bigger. The other thing we want to do is let's make it look like a title. They don't have quick styles in Sheets for some reason. So we're going to kind of fake it. We're going to make it bold, and we're going to make it bigger, say 18 points. So, and that does the trick. Doesn't look quite as nice, but here's one thing we can do that's pretty neat. We're going to take, so we want to band the rows and make the chart like look nice. So Sheets does this in a similar way to Excel, but check this out. So we will select all of the column headings. So from the word bill to the word December, we're going to make them bold, and then we're going to center them above their respective columns just because that looks nice. Now we're going to reselect cell A2 through M6, which is basically the entire table, not this cell up here. We just want these ones. And then we're going to go up to Format, and down here we have alternating colors. So what this does is it gives us our banded rows, and it really nicely formats the header bar with a darker color, a heading style color. Select one that you like. I'm going to take this orangish looking one. And now you'll notice that there's a very poor contrast in the header row. So why don't we just reselect that and change that text color to white so that they stand out. So better contrast. Darker colors in a background should have lighter colors as the actual text color. So next, we are going to add some statistics. We're going to do a little bit of statistical analysis. So we'll start with total. And notice when you type total into column N2, it automatically formats the rest of the column. So it's pretty slick. It'll do the same thing over here. You won't notice it as much though, because this row is already going to be white. So we'll add a total row and a total column. Now, what we want to do is create like a sum function. We want to create sums in these cells and these cells. Now, how to do this? It's not quite as slick as it is in Excel, but it's not so bad. We'll select this cell first, and we'll go up to this little sigma to find our functions. This will have our most commonly used ones right here. We want the sum function because the sum is adding. And then we'll just select from January through December. Boom. And then hit enter. So this gives us the total. This is the total of all these added together. Now, to quickly copy and paste these down is we will use the fill handle, which we've already talked about in previous tutorials. So you reselect cell N3 and click on mouse over the fill handle until your cursor turns into the plus, and then pull it down to the bottom and then release, and then it will fill in the rest of the column. Actually pull it down one extra so that we can get the total row as well. Here we're going to do the same thing, except it's a column instead. So we click on the sum function, boom, that creates our sum function here, equals sum, and then our parentheses, and then we'll highlight these 4 cells above it, and then hit enter. And that creates our total. So notice that the formula is actually equal sum B3 to B6, but the value is 555. And then we'll grab this, drag the fill handle over here, and as always, you'll notice up here in the formula bar that the column letters are incrementing each cell automatically using relative references. Now, we're going to create a couple of little statistical formula columns, columns where we can get sort of like averages and things like that. So we're going to do average, tab, min, tab, and max, tab. Notice it automatically formats the cells below. So if we wanted the average of all of these months of the year for our bills, we can do the same procedure. We go here, average, and then select January through December, and then click enter, and that'll give us our average. Let's do all 3 of these first before we fill in with the fill handle. So we want the minimum, so we want to know what month did we spend the least, or what was the value of the least month, and then we want the maximum. How much did we spend in the highest month? Boom. So now we have our 3 statistical fields. Let's drop the number of decimal places that are shown here, and you can do that with these tools over here. So we want to decrease the number of decimal places, so we'll click that a few times till it's down to like 1 decimal place. I think I missed that step in the text tutorial, but it'll be fine if you don't do it. Select all 3 cells. So this one, this one, this one, and then grab the fill handle and drag it straight down, and that will fill in the rest of the table for you. Pretty slick, huh? The last one we want to do is a kind of a fancier little formula. We're going to call this percent of total. So we want to know which one of these. You may have to resize this cell a little bit, to accommodate that. What we want to do is find out, so if the total amount of money we spent on heat was 1,436, what we want to know is what percentage of the total, which is 4962, is that? So how we do this is we start with our equal sign. We're going to do this one by hand. And to get a percentage of something, so if I want 4936 of 4962, I actually divide the smaller number by the larger number to find out what percentage this is of that. So I take the smaller number and then put a / and then the larger number. Now, one problem with this is if I drag this down with the fill handle to fill in the rest of the column, not only will the n part, or the first part increment, but so will the second part. And so we want to divide all of these 4 numbers by just this number. So if you think back to the previous tutorials, this means that N7 needs to be an absolute reference. And to do that, you insert $ before the N and the 7. The keyboard shortcut to do this is F4, the F4 key on your keyboard, on the very top row of a standard keyboard. If you're using a Chromebook, you may just have to insert the $ manually. I don't know if they have function keys or not. Maybe they do. I don't know. I'm not going to check at the moment. But you may have to insert the $ by hand. It's not that big of a deal. Notice Sheets does give you the result in a little call out box before you hit enter, which is kind of neat. So we'll hit enter. We will reselect it and then drag the fill handle down to fill in the column. Notice the bottom one, the last one is 1. So that's a key indicator that we did things correctly, because this divided by itself would be 1. So we'll reselect them and we'll format them as percentages. And notice percentages are like the fraction, the decimal number divided or multiplied by 100. So we hit that, and that'll give us our percentages to 2 decimal places, just like that. Pretty handy. Okay, let's build some charts. The first one I want to do is build a bar graph. I'm going to zoom out slightly here, 125 maybe, yeah. What we want to do is we want to grab a certain part of this chart. We want to grab all of the column name, or all the row names, including the total row, and drag all the way to December. Don't grab the total column. So we want to grab from the word bill down to this number 468. So cells A2 through M7. Now we're going to insert a chart. Insert chart. So this is up here. And when you do that, it's going to think for a minute. Get rid of this chart editor. Oh wait, I wanted to keep the chart here. Hang on. Insert chart. Sorry. Okay, so this is the default chart that it gives us. And this isn't exactly what we want. It just automatically gives you a chart that may or may not be what you were looking for. So we're going to make some changes to it. The first thing we want to do is change the chart type to a combo chart. And here's our combo chart. It gives you a few other options, but the one that we want is the combo chart. And this is, of course, way wrong. A couple of things that you'll want to verify are that all of these are checked. We want to use row labels. We want to use column A as headers. We want to switch rows and columns. You want all of those things activated. Now it's also still going to be a little bit goofy. For some reason, it only set up heat as a bar and everything else is a line. That's not great. We don't want that either. So make sure that stacking is at none. Your defaults may be different from mine. Google seems to try to predict what it thinks we're going to do. So what mine is doing is not actually matching up exactly with what the tutorial says happened. So your mileage may vary. You might have slightly different default values, but we're gonna bring it all together. I'll show you where we need to go. So make sure these are all checked. We definitely want the rows and columns switched. We want column A as headers, and we want row 2 as labels as well. So those are those labels down here, and that's the series headers right here. So now we're going to customize it, and we're going to go pretty much just into the series thing. And the first thing we want to do is apply to all series. We want to make everything a column. Boom. So everything's a column now. That's what we want. Each month is like a cluster of columns showing the respective values of those bills. Now we only want to apply to the total series the line graph. So we want the line graph. Now if you look at this, you'll see that the line graph is, since it's the total, it's like the sum of all of the other series. You'll notice that it's kind of suppressing and pushing all the other data down. So what we're going to do is we're going to give it its own axis, and that'll cause all the other data to pop back up. So we'll change the total column, the line graph, and we'll swap it over to the right axis, which will cause all the other bars to shoot up and get taller and take their be better positioned here. So the total is now a bar or a line, and then everything else is bars, which is a lot nicer. Now, for some reason, this one didn't give me a chart title, so let's give it a chart title. We'll call it Monthly Bills. Monthly Bills. There we go. And that'll appear up here. Maybe we'll center it because it looks nice. And then let it choose whatever. Everything else just can be defaults automatically set. So there it is. There is our first chart for this class, I think. It shows you like aggregated data with this line, and then it shows you the individual bills and the individual months. At a glance, you can see kind of how the whole year played out on these bills. These are fake bills, but you know. Here's another thing we want to do. is hit these three dots, the ellipses, and then we want to move to its own sheet. So, boom, chart 1. It'll create its own sheet down here on the bottom left. It'll create its own tab, and then this chart will be the only thing on that sheet. It'll fill the entire thing. Now, we want to create a pie chart. So the pie chart is actually really, really simple. We want to select these 4 names. So we want to select the labels of the columns, and then we want to get the totals. So a pie chart, we want parts of the whole. You could theoretically do like a pie chart for every month, but we're not gonna. We're just gonna grab this, select those 4 cells. Now hold the control key down on your keyboard, and then select these 4 cells. This is what it should look like. So once more, select these labels, hold the control key, and then select these 4 labels. This is how you can select cells that are not contiguous in like a rectangular shape. So with those 8 cells selected, we'll go to Insert, and we'll hit Chart. And the default seems to typically be a bar chart, which is incorrect. We don't want that. So we're going to swap that out for a pie chart. So you go up here, chart type, select pie. If it's not one of the suggested ones, you can scroll down to find a pie chart. There's 3D pie charts too. I don't really mind if you use one of those. But I'm just going to use the recommended one. And then it'll give me this cool pie chart with these little call outs with the values in them and everything. I don't know, I think it looks really nice. I'm going to change the chart title to like bill totals, and then maybe center it because that's a nice thing to do. And then close that out. So there's our pie chart, really easy to do. The only thing that's really tricky is making sure you select the cells correctly. And now we'll select this, move it to its own sheet, and there it is. We'll pop back over here. The last thing we want to do in this tutorial is play around with sparklines. These are a little bit tricky. We're gonna insert a couple of rows. So a sparkline is like a chart that fits inside of one cell. So we'll select column O, and we're going to insert a new column to the left of it, and then we're going to do it again because we're going to do 2 different sparklines. So in column P now, we're going to call this year trend, and then maybe make it a little bit wider, and then I think we change it to total comparison. Total comparison. So that will also need to be a little bit bigger to accommodate that text. So let's do the year trend first. So how you create a sparkline, there's a couple of different ways. The one way you can do it is go into have this cell selected, go into the functions, and go down to Google and select sparkline. Or you can just type equals sparkline and then add your data. So it's going to create this formula equals sparkline, and it's going to create blank an empty parentheses, so it won't do much of anything. So let's add our data. In between those 2 parentheses, we're just going to highlight January through December and then hit enter. And that gives us our little trend line for the year. So you can actually see the shape of the data in this little compact 1-cell space, which is kind of cool. We'll drag that down to the bottom, and then we'll see trend lines for each of the other bills and the trend line for the total. Notice how heat kind of dominates a lot of that. It's just kind of interesting how each one of those charts kind of affects the rest of it as a whole. So the total comparison, this is also going to be a sparkline. I gave you in the text the formula to type in. You could just copy and paste it from there, but I'm going to go through the typing of it by hand. If you copied and pasted it, I would never know that you did, but I want to show you how this works. So notice the syntax here. It says sparkline, and then the next thing I want to do is data. The data goes in the parentheses, followed by a comma, followed by options and settings. Notice we didn't do any options in the previous one. So the default is a line graph. It takes the data and makes a line graph with it. We're going to have to do something a little bit different because we just want this total. So we want the total. Equals sparkline. So we want the total, and then a comma, and now we want to create some options. So we're going to do left curly brace, and then in parentheses, chart type, comma, and we want it to be a bar. Semicolon, we want the max to be 3,000, because that's about, I mean, this one's 2,300. We don't really want to do 2,300 as the max. So we'll have a number that's just a little bit bigger so that none of the bars actually fills the entire cell. Close our curly brace, close our parentheses, hit enter. And you'll notice that now I have a bar in this cell that is basically the comparison of this number 1436 to the number 3000. If I drag this down to these other three cells, I get the same result. So I can visually see how each one of these things compares to each other in reference to some maximum value. So it gives you kind of a proportional difference between these totals. I mean, I can, kind of intellectually reason that 700 is like half of 1400, but here I can actually see that this bar is half as long as that bar. And I think that that's a little bit more intuitive for human visual thinking. So that's it. This is a little bit of a longer tutorial, but I hope it was illuminating. If you have any questions about this, be sure to shoot me an email. Other than that, signing off, submit this to the course portal as normal.